The cold was not a weather condition. It was a geologic era. It was a physical weight that pressed down on the shoulders of Private First Class Elias Eli Vance, settling into the marrow of his bones like lead. It was December 16, 1944, in the Ardennes forest, a place the maps called the Ghost Front because nothing ever happened there. The war was supposed to be ending. The Germans were beaten, retreating into their shell across the Siegfried Line. Here, in the dense, snow-choked woods near the border of Belgium and Germany, the only enemy was the frostbite that turned toes black and the boredom that turned minds to mush. Eli's normal was a sensory deprivation tank of pine trees and fog. He was a forward observer for the 99th Infantry Division, stationed in a listening post, a glorified hole in the ground covered with logs and dirt, overlooking a narrow logging trail that wound its way east toward the German lines. His world was defined by the smell of damp wool, the taste of stale cigarettes, and the rhythmic, crunching sound of his own boots whenever he shifted his weight to keep the blood flowing. He checked his watch. 5 o'clock. The radium dial glowed faintly in the pitch black. Beside him, Private Sully Sullivan was asleep, his breath wheezing in the frigid air. Sully was 18, a replacement who had arrived 3 days ago, thinking he'd missed the war. He slept with the innocence of someone who believed the sergeants when they said the Germans opposite them were old men and young boys with no fuel and no fight left. Eli knew better. Or he thought he did. He felt the silence of the forest not as peace, but as a held breath. He reached for the EE-8 field telephone, the heavy bakelite handset freezing against his ear. "Command, this is OP4. Come check over." "Read you, OP4," came the bored voice of the radio operator back at the company CP, a warm farmhouse 2 miles to the rear. "Status: cold, dark, quiet. Any word on the chow wagon?" "The boys are freezing. City." "Left the depot at 4:30, Eli. He should be rolling up on you any minute. Hot coffee and donuts today." "Early Christmas. Roger that. Out." Hot coffee. The thought of it was the only thing keeping Eli from drifting into a stupor. The chow wagon, a battered Doosan-to-half truck driven by a corporal named City, was the most important piece of machinery in their lives. It was the clock by which they set their existence. It arrived every morning at 5:15, bringing warmth, mail, and the reassurance that the army hadn't forgotten them in this frozen purgatory. Eli stood up, peering over the icy lip of the foxhole. The fog was thick, a wall of gray cotton that swallowed sound and light. Visibility was zero. He strained his ears for the familiar grind of the truck's gears, the squeal of its brakes on the icy road. He heard nothing. Just the wind sighing in the pines and the sharp crack of a frozen branch snapping under its own. Wait, 5:20 passed. Then 5:30. The unease began as a small, itching sensation at the base of his neck. City was never late. City knew that coffee in this weather was medicine. Eli shook Sully awake. "Hey, wake up. Something's wrong." Sully groaned, rubbing his eyes. "Coffee here." "No, that's the problem." Eli picked up the phone again. "Command, OP4. City is a no-show. Can you raise him?" "Stand by, OP4." Eli waited. The static in the line sounded like frying bacon. He looked out into the darkness. The silence felt heavy now, pressurized. It wasn't just that the truck was late. It was that the woods felt empty. Usually, there was the distant bark of a dog, the hum of a generator, the clatter of a patrol. Tonight, the forest was a vacuum. OP4, command. We can't raise City. He probably slid into a ditch. The roads are glass. We're sending a jeep to check his trace. Sit tight. Copy. Eli hung up, but the knot in his stomach tightened. A ditch. It was the logical explanation. The instability of human judgment under war's pressure always leaned toward the mundane. A truck is late. It crashed. A radio is silent. The battery died. The mind refused to accept the alternative because the alternative was unthinkable. But Eli was a hunter before the war. Back in Pennsylvania, he knew that when the woods went this quiet, it wasn't because of the weather. It was because a predator was moving. He grabbed his binoculars, though they were useless in the fog. He climbed out of the foxhole, keeping low. "Where are you going?" Sully whispered. "Scared now?" "Just to the road." "I want to listen." Eli crept forward, his white snow cape blending with the ground. He reached the edge of the logging trail, 50 yards from their hole. He knelt in the snow, pulling his hood back. He closed his eyes and listened. He heard it. It wasn't a truck. It wasn't the high-pitched whine of a Jeep. It was a low, guttural vibration, a thrumming that came from the earth itself, traveling up through his knees. THRUM-THRUM-THRUM-THRUM. It sounded like a massive engine idling, but not one. Hundreds. He pressed his ear to the frozen ground. The vibration was stronger. It was coming from the east, from the German lines. And then he heard the clank. It was a distinct metallic sound, heavy steel striking stone. The sound of a tank track turning on a sprocket. Eli's blood ran cold. The intelligence reports said the Germans had no fuel. They said the panzers were all in the east fighting the Russians. They said this was a rest sector. "Sully," Eli hissed, scrambling back to the hole. "Get on the horn, now." He dove into the foxhole just as Sully grabbed the handset. "Command. Command. This is OP4. We have movement. Heavy movement." "Mechanical?" The line was dead. Not silent. Dead. No static, no hum. The wire had been cut. "It's dead, Eli." Sully cried, his voice pitching up in panic. "What do we do?" "The runner?" Eli said, his mind racing. "We have to send a runner, or we fall back." But before they could move, the precise, factual disturbance arrived. It came out of the fog on the road they had been watching. It wasn't the chow truck. It wasn't a Jeep. It was a solitary figure. A soldier who was walking calmly out of the mist, wearing an American uniform, an MP's helmet. He stopped in the middle of the road, looking toward their position. "Hey," Sully started to stand up. "It's an MP. Maybe City crashed, and get down." Eli tackled Sully, slamming him into the mud. "What the hell? Look at his boots," Eli hissed. Sully looked. The MP was wearing American uniform pants, an American jacket, but on his feet were black hobnailed German jackboots, and he was carrying a distinct short-barreled submachine gun, an MP40, not a Thompson. He wasn't an American. He was a commando. A German infiltrator dressed in GI gear to confuse the lines, to cut the wires, to ambush the chow trucks. The fake MP raised a flare gun and fired into the air. A red flare popped, hanging in the mist like a bleeding eye. And then the horizon caught fire. It started as a low rumble like distant thunder, but it grew instantly into a roar that shattered the sky. Eli looked east. He watched the horizon burning red and thought it was dawn, until he realized the sun was still hours away. The entire eastern skyline, miles wide, was pulsating with a violent, strobing crimson light. It was the muzzle flashes of 2,000 German artillery pieces firing in unison. The sound arrived seconds later. It wasn't a series of explosions. It was a continuous, tearing scream. The air above them was filled with a freight train roar of heavy shells passing overhead. They weren't aiming for the foxholes. They were aiming deep. They were aiming for the farmhouses, the supply depots, the sleeping barracks where the rest of the division lay. Incoming. Eli screamed, curling into a ball at the bottom of the hole. The first shells landed. The earth heaved. Trees shattered, raining deadly splinters down on them. The noise was absolute, a physical pressure that squeezed the air out of their lungs. Through the concussions, Eli saw movement on the road. The fake MP was gone. In his place, emerging from the fog like monsters from a nightmare, were the shapes of tanks. Not the small ones. Tiger Eye is King Tigers. Massive, 68-ton beasts with long 88mm guns. Their engines roaring. Their tracks churning the snow into black slush. And behind them, waves of white-clad infantry. The ghost front was a lie. The intelligence was a lie. The quiet was a lie. The convoy that never arrived hadn't crashed. It had been captured by the vanguard of the greatest German offensive of the war. Eli looked at Sully. The kid was screaming, but Eli couldn't hear him. He grabbed Sully's jacket and shook him. "We have to go. We have to warn the line." But there was no line. The wire was cut. The radio was jammed with German marching music. They were two men in a hole in the path of an army. Eli grabbed his rifle. He knew, with a terrible, icy clarity, that the machinery of survival had broken down completely. The order to hold at all costs hadn't been given yet, but he knew it was coming. Or maybe it wouldn't come at all. Maybe they were already ghosts. He peeked over the rim. The lead Tiger tank rotated its turret toward their position. The muzzle? Brake looked like the eye of a dragon. "Run," Eli whispered. "Run." They scrambled out the back of the foxhole into the deep snow, running not for glory, but for breath. As the Battle of the Bulge began not with a bugle call, but with a missing cup of coffee and a sunrise that came from the wrong direction.